Good evening. On behalf of Eco Canada, welcome to our Tutti, Tavola cooking experiences. This year, Tutti, Tavola is promoted and financed by the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, carried out by Assocamere Estero in collaboration with the Italian Chambers of Commerce abroad to strengthen and to protect the authentic Italian products. Tonight, we're very happy to welcome back the Loft Cooking School at Longos as our sponsor for this evening and for next week as well. Longos is celebrating their 65th anniversary this year. Founded by three brothers, Longos first opened their doors in 1956 and are now operating 35 stores as well as Grocery Gateway, their home delivery service. Longos is home to 6,000 team members as well as 3 generations of Longos family members. And of course, Longos is a place to go for all your groceries, especially the ones that include authentic and certified ingredients from Italy. Tonight, for your chance to win a $100 gift card from Longos, just stay connected until the end of the class and cross your fingers. 2 of you will be getting an email notification from Astrid before the end of the day tomorrow. And congratulations to Carl from Dundas, Ontario, who was a lucky winner of last week's draw. Tonight, Chef Roberto Fracchioni will tell us about San Marzano tomatoes, DOP olive oil, Pecorino Romano, and Parmigiano Reggiano DOP, all included in an authentic Italian recipe, pasta alla Zozzona. Executive chef for over 20 years, food consultant and Canadian brand ambassador for many Italian products of excellence, Chef Roberto will give us insights to our products and recipe and will answer your questions with the help of our special guest, Michelle Jobin. Michelle is a TV personality and spokesperson with almost 2 decades of experience in broadcast and online media. She has become a fixture in the city's food scene and has launched Breaking Bread, a podcast that goes behind the scenes of Toronto's best kitchens. Michelle often appears as MC or spokesperson both on camera and for live audiences, and she has hosted numerous high-profile events, including Taste of Toronto. Welcome back, Michelle, and over to you and Roberto to start. And enjoy the evening, everybody. Thank you so much. Hi, Michelle.
Hello, Tatiana. Thank you so much for having me back again. To you and everyone at Eco Canada, I'm so thrilled to be here again with you all this evening, and thank you so much for that very warm welcome. I'm thrilled to be here again, not only cooking with Chef Roberto Fracchioni, because he is such an incredible wealth of knowledge when it comes to cooking, and of course, when it comes to authentic Italian products, which we're going to talk about, especially with this very exciting recipe that we're dealing with this evening. And I think that you're going to enjoy that. It's an interesting one, Chef Roberto. Tell us a little bit more about it.
So this is a little bit of a crazy pasta recipe. So I stumbled across it a little while ago, and it's called pasta alla Zozzona. And Zozzona it means kind of like dirty, and sort of like, you know, like pasta puttanesca. They always have to have like a hook in their name. So pasta alla Zozzona, it just means like a dirty pasta. So I called a friend of mine who's a chef who comes from Rome, where the dish, originated. And I told him to give me a little bit of backstory. So he basically explained that it's sort of a dish, but the word Zozzona sort of implies more gluttonous, it means like sort of rich and heavy and gluttonous, as opposed to dirty. There's no dirt in this at all. So it is a combination of 3 of my favorite pastas, which makes it pretty awesome. So it's a mixture of amatriciana, a cacio e pepe, and the carbonara. So it has like the elements of all 3 of those pastas all sort of mushed together in one.
Well, I think, Chef, you definitely have everyone's attention now, because I mean, if you have to pick 3 pastas to sort of mush together into one, Those are the three right there. Some of my favorites, of course. So now we have a little bit of a backstory when it comes to what we are making tonight. And I'm sure everybody is looking for it. I hope some of you might be cooking along this evening. And of course, a huge thank you again to the Loft Cooking School and Longo's for being our sponsors this evening. Chef Roberto will be cooking, of course, with some wonderful, authentic Italian ingredients from Longo's. And he's going to tell you all about them. And what we really want you to do is send us your questions, and we will try our very best to answer all of them to the best of our abilities over the next hour. You can send your questions and comments in the chat in Zoom. And in the meantime, Chef Roberto is going to make some incredible things today. Like I said, it's like, it's like a frankenpasta in the best sort of way, right? Like I just love the idea behind this. Yes.
Yeah, so the other thing about this pasta that I really enjoy is that it is like dead easy. And to sort of prove that, I haven't done any prep, like zero prep. It's not one of those, cooking classes where everything's magically diced and everything's magically pre-cooked in the oven. We're going to do it start to finish. We could tear it off in about 15 minutes, but I'm gonna talk a little bit about products in between. So there is, zero prep is done. So we're using, like I said, we're using the traditional ingredients from those three pastas. So the first ingredient that is fairly important, and this is in the carbonara, is our guanciale. So guanciale is my
favorite right away.
Oh yeah. So cured pig's cheek. You can see it's nice and fatty. It's super delicious. That is our first ingredient. Our second ingredient is a little bit of a fresh sausage. So this is some of the Longo's Italian sausage. This is the hot one. So they're spicy and they're sweet. I went for spicy because, I like a little bit of spice. A couple other ingredients that are very important that make this dish special are the DOP San Marzano tomatoes. And we're going to talk a little bit about this later, but this again is the Longo's Curato DOP tomatoes. And again, see, no prep. I haven't even opened my can yet. That is sort of the matriciana element, is the tomato. And then we have some pecorino romano. So the pecorino romano is, again, a Roman staple. This is the basis of the cacio and pepe. So all three of these pastas are going to come together magically in this dish. I hope.
Right.
All right.
I think it will. And as you haven't done any prep, and I see that some people are cooking long, so now would be a good time, I think. And we're going to dive in a little bit more into the importance of the authenticity of the ingredients that we're working with this evening. But as you can see, Chef has his guanciale on his cooking board, on his cutting board, I should say, and his knife ready. So let's dive right into that. And a reminder, I should say, as Tiziana mentioned, 2 of you will be winning $100 gift cards from Longo's. So stick around until the end for that. Okay, so Chef Roberto, I see that you're chopping up the guanciale right now. You're doing like long thin strips at the moment.
Our first step is to do a nice fine dice of the guanciale. Now, this is sort of the only part of this that takes a little bit of skill, because you do want a nice small dice. These are about, I'd say about 1/8 of an inch, a little under 1/8 of an inch thick. You don't want them too thick, too big of a dice, because then it'll just get kind of like rubbery, not rubbery, but it's just like a whole lot of pork in your mouth at one time. And you really want the dish to sort of come together. You want all the flavors to come together. So you don't want too big of a chunk of guanciale in your mouth at any given time. So a nice fine dice, as small as you can get it, dice of guanciale. And I'm only doing a couple of portions here. So I'm just going to do, I did what, 3 slices of guanciale. So once our guanciale is diced, then we just put it into a pot. I'm not turning the pot on yet. I'm just putting it in to get, to sit there out of our way while we prepare the sausage. So the sausage,
great. So we had some questions about the guanciale. Someone asked for the spelling. That's been put in the chat. Is the guanciale from Longo's?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So the guanciale, I mean, it's this is just I think it's about 1/4 of a piece, which is nice because it's a small piece. a little guanciale goes a long way. It does have a fairly pronounced flavor.
Okay. And
don't need
also, someone has asked if they don't have guanciale, can you use pancetta or bacon?
You can. I mean, you absolutely can. I don't know if the purists would be happy about it, but the fat content in guanciale is a little bit, there's a little higher fat content. But it's the flavor, basically, of the guanciale that makes this dish, and that makes like an amatriciana special, because guanciale is very, very flavorful. It's very, I always say it tastes like pig. Like it's very, very pig. It's not like a regular cured sausage. It tastes like fennel seeds or the herbs that go into it. It tastes like pork. It really does. So if you do use pancetta, it just won't have as much, you know, as much flavor to it. It'll be a little thinner, but it'll still work well. Bacon, I would stay away from bacon because it's smoky, and the flavor of the smoke would just completely change the dish. So, I mean, you could do it, but you wouldn't call it a Zozzona. So we have our fresh sausage now. So all I'm doing is I'm just going to cut it and peel off the casing, and I'm going to put, because I'm only doing two, I'm just going to take a half of the half a piece of sausage and just sort of loosely crumble it and put it into the pot. So our pot, like I said, our pot is not on. I'm just going to wash my hands here. We're going to turn it on a nice sort of low heat. We don't want to fry our meat. We want something sort of in between a fry and a sweat. Sweating is very low temperature. Sauteing or frying is very high temperature. So we want something kind of in between. And see, this is what I mean by I didn't do any prep. I haven't even opened my olive oil bottle, and now I'm wrestling with it.
You're doing that. I will remind everybody that the recipe has been put in the chat. There is a link there to Chef Roberto's recipe. Should you be cooking along, or should you want it for later? And I think we're all going to want to make this dish at some point. I'm hooked already. You're definitely speaking my language right now. So you've got your olive oil. That's going in the pot as well.
Yep. So this is some of the signature series from Longo's as well. So I went with the Tuscan oil because, you know, Rome, Tuscany, we're kind of there. Actually, the pecorino's part of the region in which pecorino can be made is actually in Tuscany. So we kind of stay, you know, with the same oil from the same region. And we just put a nice little glug of olive oil in here. Now, don't be shy. Don't be afraid. This is not a pasta for the you know, health conscious, because there's a lot of stuff going in here. So don't be afraid to add a little bit of oil. Don't be afraid to cook with olive oil, because olive oil is always good, hot or cold. You don't want to deep fry in it, but you can get away with this cooking method. So like I said, somewhere between a sweat and a saute. Okay.
Looking great.
So,
and I did notice that we had a IGP seal, I believe, on that olive oil, of course.
Absolutely. This is now this is the one thing with IGP and DOP labels, is that a lot of stores are doing private labeling. So Longo's has this oil private labeled for them with their brand, with their name on it, but it's still DOP or IGP. So you don't have to worry so much that it says, you know, product of Italy, authentic Italian. Don't get confused or distracted by all that. Just look for the IGP and DOP labels, and you'll always get a good product. Always.
And I've got an example of those right here. If when everyone's ready, I can hold them up in front of the camera to show you what both of them look like, what the seals. We saw what the IGP seal looks like, and then the DOP seal is red. And when you're ready, Chef, we can talk about the importance of using authentic Italian ingredients and what these seals mean, what these certifications mean when it comes to these particular authentic Italian ingredients from Italy.
Yeah, so DOP and IGP are hugely important. They really are. They are basically quality guarantees. Now, they refer to the fact that not only is the quality of the product of a higher level, but that the traditions of its production and the area in which it's produced in are strictly followed. So if you, I don't know, if you and I move to Italy next month, and
okay.
and we say, hey, we're going to raise some cattle, and then we make some beef stock, and then we turn that into gravy, and we grow some potatoes, and we deep fry them, and we make an Italian poutine with IGP products, with IGP potatoes and IGP beef. We still can have an IGP or DOP poutine because there's no history of poutine in Italy. So all of these products have to demonstrate a sort of a history that they have existed in the region for quite a long time. And they have to adhere to the traditional methods of production. Now, with cheese, with meats, you know, of course they're not doing it like they did 2,000 years ago because we have refrigeration now and we have vacuum sealers. So there have been changes, obviously, for, you know, health and safety. But traditionally, the traditional method, the way that the rennet is added to the milk to produce the cheese, the way things are aged, all of those have to be followed, or else you don't have a DOP or IGP seal. So it's very, very important. It's very serious business. It's not something that you mess around with.
Okay, so now you all know what to look for. This is the IGP seal. This is the DOP in the red. IGP is blue, DOP is red. And Chef, if you quickly have something to tell us a little bit about what the difference between DOP and IGP is, that would be great.
Yeah, so the DOP is a little bit more strict than IGP.
Okay.
So the red label, the DOP, means that every step of the process has to be carried out in a very specific region. So, for example, if we're talking about the Pecorino Romano, not only does the cheese have to be aged in the 3 areas in which it's produced, but the milk has to come from the area, from a select breed of cows that are fed a certain amount of, you know, alfalfa and a certain amount of wheat. Everything is controlled and everything is done in a very specific region. With IGP, one of those steps can be done outside of the region. So, for example, if the sheep for the pecorino, you know, we're getting a feed, we're getting, you know, grasses from a region outside of Lazio, Sardinia, or Tuscany. There's a very small Grosseto is the region in Tuscany. If the grass for the sheep come from a region outside of there, it can't get DOP status. It'll be IGP because, you know, some of the feed comes from outside of the area. So still very, you know, very high quality, very strict rules and regulations, but either, you know, the feed or the cattle or the packaging, even if the packaging is done outside of the region, then it cannot have DOP status.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chef. Now we have a fuller understanding of all of those things. And I see that everything that you have in the pot there, the guanciale, the sausage, and the olive oil are looking very happy right now. So yes, hopefully everyone that's cooking along. I bet it is. I'm a little bit jealous. So where do we move on in terms of the next step now with this dish?
Sure. So now we're going to start working on the sauce. So this is sort of the sauce, but there's kind of the other sauce. So this is the carbonara part of the sauce. So we start with a couple of eggs. So we're just going to use the egg yolks. And so we separate our eggs. And, ooh, that's a good egg. See when it drips like that? Oh, that's a nice fresh egg.
Good to know.
And please don't crack your eggs on the edge of a bowl. Don't do that. You get shells in your eggs. Very bad practice.
On a flat surface is better, right?
Absolutely. On the cutting board. Look at that. Oh, man, that doesn't want to come off. On a cutting board or even the side of the bowl if you really need to, but not on the edge of the bowl. So we have our 2 egg yolks in our bowl, and we're going to add our Pecorino Romano. So the Pecorino Romano, again, this is the Longo's Corato brand. So DOP, it's all good. They followed all the rules and they get their check mark saying that they can put the DOP logo on it. And we're just going to grate a little bit of this cheese. So for 2 egg yolks, you want to do about 40 grams of pecorino.
Okay.
You don't want to do too much more than that, or else it will overpower the other sauces. So
for those of us who don't have a digital scale or anything like that, how would we know where to go with that?
Well, if you look at these packages are 200 grams.
There you go.
So you say about
A
a
little
quarter of a piece of a quarter of a wedge of the pecorino. Now you can always, go a little bit light, go a little, guess on the underside, on the light side, and then if you taste it when you're done, and you want a little bit more kick, then go ahead, put a little bit more pecorino in. Now, pecorino romano. Sure.
If for any reason, should any of us have water boiling or anything for the pasta at this point, or we don't need to start that yet?
You can.
Okay.
Thank you for the reminder. I'm going to turn my water on.
Okay.
Okay. You're good
welcome,
at this, Michelle. You're awesome.
I'm hungry. You know what it is? I'm just hungry. So I'm just thinking, where do we go next? So we've got the pecorino in the bowl with the egg yolks. Okay.
Yep. And now we just mix it, and you'll make like a creamy sauce. So you can see here, mine is a little bit thick. So the cheese absorbs the moisture from the egg yolks. So what we do to correct that is we add a little bit of the pasta water. So
okay.
When you do this, I like to cool it down a little bit first before I pour boiling water into the mixture, because it will kind of scramble the eggs wherever the boiling water hits the yolks. And then, it's just not very nice. So I'm just going to take a little bit out, put it off to the side, just let it cool down for a minute while I do the next step with back to the first sauce.
Okay.
So we can see that our guanciale has picked up a little bit of color. It's lightly brown. The meat has a little bit, the sausage has a little bit of brownness to it, not a ton. This is where we move on to our next step. So the next step for the first half of the sauce is to add our San Marzano tomatoes. So for those of you who don't know San Marzano tomatoes, I mean, everyone has heard that term before, but there seems to be a lot of confusion, and it's very easy to understand why, because San Marzano refers to not only the DOP designation of San Marzanos, but also to a variety. So you can buy fresh San Marzano tomatoes at, in the stores and farmers markets in the fall, but those aren't the DOP San Marzanos from Italy. Real San Marzano tomatoes are grown, in the south, in the valley below Mount Vesuvius, where it has a very, rich soil. So it does impart a very distinct flavor to them. In order to receive the DOP designation, they have to come from that region. They have to be picked by hand. And when you see them in the stores, you can tell that they're real, because they don't just say San Marzano tomatoes. They say San Marzano, tomatoes of Agro, Sarnese, Nocerello. All of this has to be on the label, or else they're not real San Marzanos. The other important aspect, not only does it have the DOP designation, it has another seal, and that little number on the side, that 211961, that serial number is traceability of the product. From that serial number, you can trace that can of tomatoes right back to the field in which they were grown. You don't get that unless you're buying the real San Marzano DOPs. And if you ever see a San Marzano DOP and it says that, and there are a lot of counterfeits out there, which is pretty sad, but if you see that and then you look at the ingredients and it says San Marzano tomatoes and salt and citric acid and basil and garlic and oregano, then it's not San Marzano. They're not the real San Marzano. San Marzanos can only be shipped in this state, which are whole tomatoes peeled. So they don't puree it and ship it. They're done this way. They're canned and shipped. Peeled and with a little bit of the sauce in there as well. So
So great to know.
So you can see it's like whole tomato, just with the skin off. So we just put that in and we break it up a little bit. We don't want to like completely puree it, because part of the dish, part of the beauty of the dish, because this is, you know, it is a peasant dish. Gianluca, the friend of mine who I spoke to, the Italian chef from Rome, said this is what his cooks would make. After a long night of service and they're hungry at 4 in the morning, once they're done scrubbing the kitchen, this was their sort of staff meal after dinner. So you're not going to sit there and puree your tomatoes. The farmers, they didn't sit there and puree their tomatoes. They just throw it in and let it do its thing.
Staff meal is always what all the chefs and the cooks eat for staff meal is always a very important thing to know, and it's always delicious.
So now we're going back to our second sauce. So now that my water has cooled down a little bit, I'm going to add just a couple of drops of water until we get a consistency that's sort of equal to the yolks in the beginning. So if you were to just crack the yolks before we added the cheese, that's about the thickness of the sauce when we're done. So I have a glare on that camera, so I'm going to use this camera so everybody
I can see it. It's sort of like you're rehydrating them a little bit. You're getting that sheen back to them. Now, Chef, I just have a couple of quick questions. There is a question about, are all the Longo items readily available at all their Longo's locations? That's not something that Chef or I can confirm at this time, but we'll work on that answer for you to the person that asked that. Presumably yes, but sometimes things are in stock, sometimes they're not, but perhaps we'll get an answer for that for you. Another person asked, in the session with Chef Emma, which I believe was last week, she believes that it may have been mentioned that the Emma brand San Marzano puree is DOP also. So she wants to know if that is correct or if that is mistaken. In your opinion, can the DOP only be sold?
Check.
Okay.
But like when I buy my San Marzanos, I always go for this way, like when it's just whole tomatoes. So I've never really looked for it, but it was my understanding that they come peeled, not pureed. But I could be wrong. I don't know everything.
However, we do know now that whether it's peeled or pureed, we need to look for particular things on the label to ensure the certification and then the authenticity of it. So that's good to know.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So now we're going to start our pasta. We're actually going to start cooking the pasta. So when I'm in a rush, I usually do all of the sauce work while the pasta is cooking, because the pasta takes about 10 minutes to cook.
Yeah. So
I usually do all of it after I drop the pasta in the water. So we have a nice big pot of water. Make sure you have ample water. This is not a dish. There are times where you want to do a little bit of water, like a much lower ratio of pasta to water, if you want a super starchy pasta water to sort of make a sauce. But we don't want that. We want big rolling boils, lots of salt. Just how do I say this? I get asked all the time how much salt is the right amount. There's a lot of different numbers out there. I was taught, and most chefs, most cooks are taught, make it taste like the ocean. That's a little too salty. That's about 35 milligrams of salt. We want about 10. But we just say make it taste like the ocean. And I say it to my cooks all the time too, so that they'll actually make it taste, more salty than, I don't know, a cracker, right? So you want lots of salt. And remember that most of the salt just goes down the drain when we strain the pasta anyway. So even though you're dumping a whole lot of salt into your water, most of it does not get ingested. And it's the only chance we get to actually season the pasta. And that's really important. If you don't put salt in your water when you boil your pasta, you can say, I'll just put more salt in sauce. And there's, guanciale salt there. That doesn't work that way. The salt in the water, penetrates into the actual noodles and actually seasons the noodles. And without that, your pasta tastes so flat. Like it just tastes flat. It doesn't matter how good your sauce is. The pasta just tastes bleh. We don't want to make that kind of food. So
no, we do not.
Salt.
Lots of salt. Okay,
salt,
so
and
when you salt when the water comes up to a boil, right? Or does it matter?
So this is another debate that I've had so many times with so many chefs, Italian, Canadian, everyone. And I put it in beforehand so that I wouldn't forget. But generally, I do it before I drop my pasta in. I wait for it to come to a boil. And that's because the consensus of the chefs that I've spoken to, the Italian chefs that I've spoken to, have told me that's how you do it. And when I ask why, they always have the same answer. They say, because that's the way you do it. So that's the way I do it.
And what type of pasta are you using this evening for this recipe?
So traditionally, this is served with a rigatoni. But when I was at the Longos, I saw that they had these paccheri.
Which, can you hold it a little bit? Oh, there we go.
There we go. The paccheri, which are like a rigatoni, but bigger. So they're much larger diameter and a little bit longer. So what's going to happen is when our sauce is done, these holes, when we toss it, I mean, there's going to be all kinds of sauce kind of hiding inside of here. So it's a great way to make sure that you get a good ratio of sauce to pasta. But you got to be careful because the heat just gets trapped inside there. And then when you go to eat it, you have to be patient and you got to give it a minute to cool down, or else, you're going to burn your mouth for sure.
Couple of questions for you, and I like the way you think about that sauce to pasta ratio that you're with the way you're going with this. One person asked, why did you not drain the grease out of? I mean, I think I know the answer to this. They said, why did you not drain the grease out of the guanciale and the olive oil and sausage? Is it because it adds flavor? I'm going to say it adds flavor, but you don't think you need to drain it out?
No, I mean, when you, that's part of the joy of using the guanciale is in any cured meat, when you cook with it, the flavor, there's more flavor in the fat than in the meat. So if we were to render that fat out in the pan and then pour that fat out, well, there goes the flavor. It also helps with the richness of the dish. Once we add the pasta to the egg and cheese mixture, then all that oil and pork fat is going to mix in with the cheese. It's all going to come together, and it's going to be a very delicious dish. It's a very rich dish. It really is. Yeah. I'm kind of glad that it's dark and stormy and feels like horrible day here, because it's a perfect dish for that. This is a very wintry sort of dish. Little out of season right now, but the weather happened to cooperate.
Another viewer was asking about if you're using whole tomatoes, are there seeds in the tomatoes, and does that affect the sauce? Does that affect the texture? Is that a concern at all?
There are seeds inside, but it doesn't affect anything. Like when you fish one out and you open it up, I'll show you all. You can see that there are some seeds inside the tomato, but they're soft. And there's not a ton of them. It's not like a regular Roma tomato. If you look at the amount of seeds that are in here, it's very, very, very few. And they're soft and they're small. And with a short cooking time, they really do break down and do not, add crunch to the dish at all.
Okay.
How?
So pasta is in for about 10 minutes, you said?
Yep. So like I said, you can do all of this while the pasta's cooking, but I kind of wanted to, slow it down so that we can pay attention and really focus on some of the products. One product that I do want to talk about is olive oil.
Let's do it.
So I haven't done this rant. I don't think I've done it once this year, but it's a rant that I always do about olive oil. And that is, don't be afraid to spend $25 on a bottle of olive oil. Okay, those $5 bottles that you buy, they're not good. I'm sorry, but they're not very good olive oil. Extra virgin olive oil, everybody knows that. EVOO, we even have an acronym for it. it's just a lot better. It tastes more like olives. And the reason is very simple. The production of olive oil has been going on forever, but there have been advancements in, harvesting and extraction of oil from the actual olive. Now, one of the biggest, advancements over 2,000 years ago is that they can crush the olives more. They can press them under a higher amount of pressure. And there's actually a chemical that can be added to the pulp of the olives to help extract more oil. Now, all of those things are bad because when you crush an olive, you almost always crack the pit. But when you really mash up the pit of the olive, you release an oil that is very, very bitter. It's very high in tannins. So just like wine, if you have a very tannic wine, you kind of feel a pull in the back of your throat. And then when you extract it under more pressure, you actually, because the pulp is put in between these hemp baskets and then pressed. And that pressure, the more pressure you apply, the more oil is extracted, but again, from the pits primarily. The chemical that is added to the pulp, it is completely flavorless, but it extracts oil from the pit. And that is very tannic oil. And it's very obvious when you try one side by side. If you get a pumice olive oil and you get an extra virgin olive oil and you taste them side by side, it is night and day. So in order to get that first cold pressed, and cold pressed is another term that is kind of confusing. All the olive producers, all the olive oil producers that I've visited have always said there's no such thing as cold pressed olive oil. We don't pick them off the trees and squish them with our fingers and let 2 drops come off of it. That's not how it works. There is a little bit of heat applied. Cold press refers to not cooking the must. And cooking of the pulp or the must of the olives helps, again, break it down, extract more oil, changes the flavor of the oil. But all olive oils are treated with a little bit of heat just to help the oil flow. Now, this is what I've been told by actual DOP producers. So that's kind of what I'm passing on. But that first pressing of olive oil, it's sweet, it's light, it tastes like olives, which is the whole point of using olive oil. So that cheap stuff, it's cheap for a reason. And if you make that switch to start spending $25 on a bottle of olive oil or more, your food will thank you, your guests will thank you, your family will thank you, whoever you're cooking for will thank you for it, because it is one ingredient that makes an immediate and drastic and noticeable difference in your food.
Do you, Chef, have, I mean, thank you for that. And that's, I love the rant, and I understand why you have the rant. Do you have sort of like a wardrobe of olive oil options for different purposes? Would you perhaps use a more expensive? So there's 2 thoughts to this: a more expensive one for one purpose versus a less expensive for another purpose, or different flavor profiles, obviously different terroirs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, there was, I love olive oils, and I'm very serious about the type of olive oil that I use. So there used to be one of these shelves. It was a 4-foot shelf down at the end. So 4 feet of shelves, 14 inches deep. That was full of olive oils. And depending on my application, I would grab a different bottle. Then I got a dog and his tail kept hitting it and they were knocking bottles all over the floor. So I had to move it or else I'd show you. But there are different olive oils for different applications. What I try and have people understand is that olive oil should be thought of and treated like wine. It really should be, because it's very similar in a lot of ways. Apart from the fermentation of wine, of the grapes, they're the same. You pick a fruit, you crush it, you do a little bit of treatment, you put it in a bottle. So olive oil changes not only from year to year and region to region, but producer to producer. And so you sort of become brand loyal. So there are 4 or 5 brands that I absolutely love. These 2 from Longo's, the Sicilian and the Tuscan, I always have these in my house. Like, honestly, there's never a day where I don't have these. And I use, without my catering, just cooking for my family, I go through at least a bottle a week. At least.
Wow.
So,
okay.
You know, I don't use butter. Like, I put butter on toast.
Yeah.
That's the only time I use butter. So I use olive oil for everything. Though these two are a great sort of starting point. It's sort of a step up from the generic olive oils that you find in the grocery store. And then from there, you can, you know, keep on experimenting. And when you find one that you like, you just stick with it. Now, year to year, it might change a little bit, but the producers are as committed to keeping sort of a very consistent product, just like wine producers are. So once you find a brand you love, you just stick with it. Buy 3 at a time so you never run out. And honestly, if people start cooking with real olive oil, it's amazing how many people have come back to me and said, I've been doing this recipe for 10 years. I finally started using good olive oil, and I can't believe how much better it is. I don't know. I've had that happen countless times. People have told me about that. So
I do not doubt it. Is there any, can you tell us those 2 olive oils that you just held up? Someone asked what the difference in the flavor profile is between the Tuscan and the Sicilian. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So the Tuscan olive oil is a little bit softer and a little bit sweeter and has less pepper, like it's less spicy. Now, it's not spicy like chilies, but the Sicilian olive oil, different variety of olives, you know, hotter climate. So the olives produce a bit more peppery flavor. So although I could have, and probably the Sicilian would have worked with the flavor profile of this dish, like I said, because Pecorino Romano, there is a region of Grosseto in Tuscany that can produce Pecorino Romano. Then I just stuck with the olive oil from Tuscany. So traditionally, the further north you go, the softer, sweeter, less peppery, and the further south you go, the more peppery, and they almost feel heavier, even though they're not. All olive oils have the same amount of fat. They just feel a bit heavier because they're a little richer.
Okay. Yeah. How are things going with our pasta there?
Our pasta is cooking. I'm going to check it in a second. Oh, yeah. Okay. So an important part with this dish is making sure that you cook your pasta al dente. Now, with rigatoni, because they're large circles, if you cook them too far, they collapse. Okay. So when you go to strain them, they're just going to be all flat and not look very nice and be kind of nasty. So what we want to do is make sure that we take it off before it gets to that stage. And I have to find my, which is right now, but I don't know where I put my strainer. I had my strainer here. See, I told you. Oh, here it is.
There we go.
I'm just going to strain my pasta now. And I want to make sure that they're fairly dry. So we're going to give it a good shake. Try and get as much water off of them as possible. And you can see that they're still holding their shape. They're not collapsing on top of each other. So we toss it into our pasta sauce. Pasta sauce number 1. And a nice little shake. Get all the water off. And again, you can see how they're not collapsing. Even when they're sitting sideways, they're not collapsing on top of each other. And I'll just fish out a couple more.
So that's all going into the mixture that has the San Marzano tomatoes, the EVOO, the guanciale, and the sausage that has been taken. It's a spicy sausage that's been taken out of the casing, right? Correct. Okay, great.
And I've just been keeping this hot. I don't want to boil it. I'm just keeping it warm. We give it a little bit of a toss so that, again, we want some of the sauce to sort of fall inside the center of the tubes. And if you don't feel comfortable sauteing, you can just stir it with a rubber spatula or a wooden spoon or anything. You just want to coat everything. And you can already see that all that oil that was kind of hanging out in the bottom of the pan, it's gone already. Even the starch, the little bit of starchy water that's on top of the pasta when it goes into the pan, will help absorb all that.
Great.
So now comes the fun part where we add the carbonara element of the sauce. So we take our egg and pecorino romano mixture and we just add it right into our pan. Now, we're doing this off of the heat. So I just put this on top of the pot so that you can see it, but you don't want to do this step on top of a burner when it's still hot.
Again.
If you have like an electric range with those, glass tops, they stay hot for a very long time. Make sure your pan is not on top of that, because if you do this step with heat applied to your pan, well, your eggs are just going to scramble and it's not going to look very appealing or appetizing at all. So our sauce goes in, we give it a little stir, and it will get nice and thick, nice and rich. Oh my goodness, that smells great. Oh man.
I wish I was there. I'm getting a few questions about how you feel about olive oil from other countries in the world. I mean, again, and they said, again, we're talking about Italian products here, so to a certain extent, it's a no-brainer. But Greece, Spain, places like that.
I am non-partial when it comes to olive oil. One of my favorite olive oils actually comes from France. And it is from a very small producer, and it is so sweet and floral. Like it's almost like drinking perfume. I don't know.
Okay.
And I've done research to see if there are some producers that will actually take the olive blossoms, harvest them in the spring, and then save them when the press comes, and actually put some of the blossoms into the oil to sort of give it a floral flavor. This producer doesn't do that, but for some reason, this French olive oil is just super sweet and super floral. So yeah, no, I'm always on the lookout, and I don't discriminate.
It only makes sense, though, that when we're dealing with an Italian recipe, that we're using Italian products, just to sort of make sure it sort of ties everything together. Of course, the flavor profile, I would think. You put a lot of thought into the flavor profiles. So, okay.
Absolutely. So our last ingredient is a little piece of Parmigiano Reggiano. So real Parmigiano Reggiano, always check the rinds for the stamps. Oh, you can't see it too well in this light. But you want to make sure that it says Parmigiano Reggiano around the edge so that you know you're getting the real thing. We're going to just shave it with a peeler, just a vegetable peeler, to get some nice big flakes. Now, you can grate it. Of course you want a stick. You can grate it and just throw it on grated, but I like doing the flakes because it just looks a little bit cooler. So a few shaves of Parmigiano. Our sauce has cooled down a little bit, which is ideal because it just gets a little bit thicker and it'll just cling to the pasta, to the actual noodles a little bit more. So now we plate. Now,
wonderful.
This is a very rustic dish. So you don't want to spend too much time to, frou it up. You can if you want, but I just like doing this, old school. Just like my grandparents would probably enjoy it. We just put it into our bowl. And again, you can see that the noodles are staying nice and tall. They're not collapsing. We're getting a little bit of filling inside the cavity of each noodle, which is what we want. And this is a very, very rich dish. So even though it smells fantastic, be careful. Don't load up on it too much, or else you won't eat anything else afterwards. I guarantee you won't eat anything else afterwards. So now all we're going to do, I'm just going to toss on a couple of those shaves of cheese. So we can kind of place them if you want to, I do have to take a picture of this, so I will spend a couple seconds just plating this. And then traditionally there is no herbs in the dish. All the flavor comes from the guanciale, from the pecorino romano, from the San Marzanos. Like there is a ton of flavor going into this, but I don't know. I kind of like, don't tell, but I like putting a few leaves of fresh oregano on here. Now,
why not, Chef? You do you.
Thank you.
It's your show.
Don't tell.
You do you.
Don't tell.
Okay, I won't. I wanted to address one comment that came up, and I think you'll probably have something to say about it, saying, I don't think I can eat raw eggs. To be clear, the raw eggs are no longer raw.
No.
In this situation,
no.
Can you explain why? That they have been heated gently by being incorporated into the pot. Okay, and that's the same with the carbonara as well, right?
Yeah,
or
so
not a carbonara. Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah,
carbonara. Yeah, so the eggs are cooked. Like they're not cold. When you put them into the pasta sauce, my pasta sauce was still steaming. The heat from the pasta, the sauce that was sitting there, is still hot enough to cook your eggs. If they weren't cooked, they would be runny. But you can see that when we put the sauce in, it thickened it up. That's what the sauteing, that's what the movement is. And that's why you don't put it on top of a hot burner, because if you apply too much heat to it, then it'll scramble your eggs. Whereas we want to poach our eggs. We want to do it just like a poached egg. So these are actually hotter. These egg yolks reach a higher temperature than a poached egg would. So it's not raw. Don't be afraid. It's all good.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that, Chef. So when you're making this dish, or if you're in a restaurant and you see it, or you're making carbonara, it's not raw. We just are not scrambled. We're existing
we're not
in this zone in between somewhere.
Yes.
Okay.
So 165 degrees is the temperature that you want to achieve.
Okay.
And that's easy to get to when you're dealing with a hot sauce, hot noodles that come right out of the water. And one last thing that, again, I would get arrested for if I was in Italy. Shh, don't tell. So I like to put a grate of lemon zest on there. I'm even whispering because it's that big of a deal. So I just put a tiny, tiny, tiny grate of lemon zest. Now, this just helps. I'm only kidding. I should stop whispering. This just helps because, like I said, there's a lot of richness going on in this dish, but just the tiniest bit of lemon zest just helps brighten the whole dish up. Now, we don't want to brighten it up to the point where, it's not gluttonous like it's intended to be, but it's just a tiny bit of levity to the dish, to the flavor profile, that makes a big, big difference.
Well, everyone is loving the look of this dish so far. I hope those of you that are cooking along are very much enjoying the process as well. So far everyone's just saying, I wish I was having that for dinner. You're having that for dinner, so we're all a little jealous. And so far everyone is really loving your little secret additions that you've made of the oregano and the lemon, just to sort of lift things up. We won't tell anyone. One person did say, can I add chili flakes into this? And would there be a time to do that?
1,000%. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that's I said, I use the spicy sausage to begin with. But yeah, if I was, if it was 2:00 in the morning and I just finished a shift at the restaurant, I'm going to dump a ton of chilies in there while I'm cooking the sauce. So the best time to add it would have been back right after the guanciale was cooked and the sausage was cooked, before I put the tomatoes in. I would put the chili flakes in there because the oil and the fat that was in the bottom of the pan would hydrate the chilies so they puff up and they're not like hard little bits. And then cook it like that for a minute, put your tomatoes into it, and that way you have, 5-7 minutes for the chilies to sort of, leach all their spiciness out. So it's not just the tiny seeds that are spicy, but the whole dish that becomes spicy.
Wonderful. Now, Chef, we talked so much about the importance of the San Marzano tomatoes. Someone asked if you could please describe the flavor profile of them. I know it's a little bit, you're the chef, so maybe you can,
it's
versus
super
another
easy.
tomato.
It's easy to explain the flavor of a San Marzano tomato. They taste like tomatoes. And
very much
I don't say that to be funny. I say that because they taste like tomatoes. And quite often, If I don't know, I get stuck and I don't have any, and I have to run to the store and they don't have any DOP San Marzano tomatoes, and I have to buy something meh. They don't taste like tomatoes to me. They taste more like the can. They're tannic, they're acrid, they're made from quite often from concentrate. Tomatoes are concentrated, shipped somewhere and rehydrated, and then made into the sauce. So they no longer taste like a tomato to me. So a San Marzano, they're sweet. They're very full and rich. Like a little goes a long way. And there's very little acid. And that's a very important part, because we've all seen recipes or seen people cook with canned tomatoes to make a tomato sauce, a bolognese sauce, a pizza sauce, whatever it is. And they cook off their tomatoes with all their stuff. And then right at the end, they say, now we put in 16 tablespoons of sugar. You don't need that. If your tomatoes are good to begin with, you don't need the sugar. The sugar doesn't cover up the acid. It's not like it neutralizes. It just fights with it in there. Once you have a tannic tomato, you can't get rid of that. Like you can't. So you start off with a sweet, mellow, tomato-flavored tomato, and you don't need to fight with it. You don't need to add sugar. You don't need to add, tons of garlic to cover it up. You just get the taste of tomatoes.
Yeah, you definitely know when you're not eating San Marzano tomatoes. I definitely know when I'm not. That's for sure. Chef, you have explained so wonderfully all of the steps for this recipe, but also the importance of these authentic Italian ingredients that we've been using tonight: the San Marzano tomatoes, the EVOO, extra virgin olive oil, of course, the Pecorino Romano, and the Parmigiano Reggiano. Some really stellar, wonderfully simple ingredients. And of course, the important thing is they're simple, but not so simple, because there's so much that goes into the making of all of these things. And we appreciate your knowledge that you've shared with us tonight. Is there anything else we need to know about this dish?
One thing, don't put salt in your sauce. I forgot to mention that when I was actually making the sauce. I didn't put any salt into my sauce because the guanciale, it's cured meat, so it has a bit of saltiness. And that's one of the biggest differences of, like a Pecorino Romano in comparison to like a different kind of Pecorino. Pecorino Romano tends to be a little bit saltier. Just from the production method, it's washed in salt regularly. So it tends to be a little more salty. So be very, very careful. You still salt your pasta water, but don't salt your sauce. There's enough salt in the ingredients that go into the dish.
That's good to know. So a Pecorino Toscano would not be as salty as a Pecorino Romano?
Traditionally, no. There are some suppliers and producers that, yes, they are a little saltier, but, if you want to sort of, generalize, then, yeah, the Romano tends to be a little bit saltier.
Okay, last question before we go, because, last question before we go, because we've got an incredible pasta dish. What wine would you drink with it, Chef?
Ooh, a big Chianti.
Okay. Like it's because there's a lot of flavor. Yeah.
There's so much flavor. There's a lot of fat. So I wouldn't go with like a super Tuscan because it doesn't have as much, they're a little too rich. You need some sort of acidity in your wine to kind of, to sort of not nullify, but to sort of cut through the fat of all the ingredients that are in the pasta. So yeah, a big Chianti, as big a Chianti as you can find, would be awesome.
Oh, amazing. So there we have it. We have pasta alla Zozzona.
Perfect.
Amazing. Thank you. There we go. And it's an incredible dish. Chef, we thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge with us tonight. And it's been great to see you make this dish. We're all looking forward to either eating dinner, if we've been cooking along with you, or making it a little bit down the road. Thank you so much. And of course, a huge thank you again to the Loft and to Longos and to all of you and to everyone at Eco Canada for having me on board this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I want to pass things over to Tiziana right now.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was great. And it was great to have you with us for this class. And we look forward to having you again in our upcoming events. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And thanks again. And thank you, Roberto. The pasta looks amazing. I'm a pasta lover and I'm going to try this recipe. in the next few days. It's great. I also like to thank Longos for being with us this class and for sponsoring with the Loft cooking school. And we're happy to have you back next week as well. And a big thank you, of course, goes to Astrid, Ilaria, Monica, Richard, and Mary, who are behind the scenes and make this event possible. And of course, our executive director, Corrado Paina. And on the occasion of our 60th anniversary, consider becoming a member of the Chamber at a special entry level of $200 and keep supporting us. So see you next week. Buona serata and arrivederci. And thank you again, Roberto, for this beautiful recipe and tasty as well.